We've been studying the book of Luke, so we're going to get right to it tonight. I don't want to take up too much of your time, maybe about the next 25 or 30 minutes. We're moving right along. You might think, we've spent several weeks now and just, we're not even finished with the second chapter yet. We should finish it tonight. But you might have thought, it's several weeks and we've just barely got through 2 chapters in Luke. But honestly, there were almost 80 verses, wasn't there, in chapter 1? I forgot exactly yeah, there are 80 verses in chapter 1, and then there's 52. So that's 132 verses. That's about 13 chapters in Psalms, okay, if we were doing it. So we're doing pretty good. I mean, we're 132 verses in. So, we're not doing bad. We're doing pretty good for a Pastor Frank pace anyway.
Yeah.
Tonight, though, I think we're going to try to finish up this second chapter. And what a great little incident that Luke records. This is only recorded in the Gospel of Luke. These verses that you're going to hear tonight are not recorded in any other gospel. I think it was Luke found it really, really important to include it because I need a note, and I'm going to go get it because it's really important. And I thought it didn't print out, and I want to see if it did finally print. That's why I don't have it with me. And we'll see if I can get it. Of course, you can't do anything with the camera right now, but that's okay. Normally he could zoom out, but he's in there zoomed in on the baby right now.
Hey, baby, come
Listen, I know that we don't think this way. We're at Hands and Feet Fellowship, and we have we have a good, we have our heads wrapped around a good theology here. We know that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. Mm-hmm. But it's really important to know that, and so this is, I'm going to preach this for your prosperity, for our younger generation to see and know. Never forget that Jesus Christ was God in the flesh. He's the Son of God, and I'm going to prove to you tonight how Son of God actually equates him with God. He's called the only begotten of God. John 3:16 says, how does it start? John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And so people, listen, there are religious cults out there that believe that he was born of God, that he was born in Mary, that's where Jesus came from. And that's why John writes his gospel right off the bat. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh. Mm-hmm. And the Word dwelt among us. And his own received him not. John was very explicit saying that Jesus has always been. He didn't just show up in Mary's womb, okay? And that's why we were saying when we watched our little video about the Chosen here a couple of weeks ago, that shepherd was healed by the baby, right. Jesus Christ. He was as much God as an infant as he was when he hung on the cross or when he came out of the grave. He was always God. And Luke gives us this beautiful little insight to a 12-year-old Jesus that no one else gives us in any other gospel. So Matthew just starts with his ministry at 30, and Mark does the same. And John, for the most part, does too, although John gives us that beautiful chapter 1, which lets us know that he is God. Well, all 3 other Gospels do that. But I like how Luke gives us this little insight into what happened in the temple when Jesus was 12 years old. See, because there have been critics, and this is what I want to read to you. There have been critics through the years that have said this, that Jesus was just a man, and at age 30, he began to realize this fever pitch of messianic expectation. He knew that Israel was looking for a Messiah. He could see that the pressure was on. Pressure to lead a new movement in an apostate kind of religion under a beleaguered people who had been trampled on by the Medes and the Persians and the Greeks and now the Romans. And he needed to free them from that. And he was pressed into acting the role of a Messiah for the sake of what turned out to be an ill-conceived attempt at revolution. In other words, Jesus failed. That's why he was crucified. There are others who say that Jesus was simply a human being But around the age of 30, the Spirit of God came upon him and transformed him into the living Logos, the living Word. And listen, all of these, of course, are just misrepresentations of the fact of what we know and what we believe. And like I said, I know you guys do, but it's important in these Gospels to understand why certain things are written, where they're written. And Luke is going to give us this story tonight that's very, very telling about Jesus being the Son of God. So we're going to start reading in verse 41. You know the story so far. This chapter 2, has been all about Luke wants to prove Jesus' existence and that he is the Son of God to Theophilus. So he gives him these witnesses. So of course we have the witness of Gabriel to Zacharias, John the Baptist's daddy, and Elizabeth, his mother. Both of them in their 70s or 80s, way beyond childbearing years, and they have a child. And his name is John the Baptist, and he is going to be the modern day Elijah. And he's going to talk about the Messiah that is to come. And then we know that Mary was visited by Gabriel. Mary goes down and sees Elizabeth. She knows that Elizabeth is probably the only person on the face of the earth that would believe Mary's story. Right. That God has come upon her and that she's a virgin, but she has a child. Elizabeth would believe that because her birth was a miracle. There's no way that she should be having a child either. And the baby leaps in her womb, and so Elizabeth knows that this is my Lord that's come. So he gives us these witnesses. And if that wasn't enough, then when they come down to the temple after Jesus was born, we have that beautiful Ananias, the lady that actually said, which one was which? You had Simeon. I'm sorry. Simeon was the prophet, and he said that God had told him all his life that he would not die before he saw the Messiah, and now he can die in peace because he knows this is the Messiah. And then we had Anna. I'm sorry. So we had Anna and Simeon. So those two beautiful witnesses. She was a prophetess too, and she also prophesied that this would be the Messiah. And then the important thing that Simeon told Mary on a personal note was that he would pierce your soul with a sword. Well, that's going to happen a few times in Mary's life, at least 3. And we talked about the one at the cross, and we can all relate to that. But there's actually one that's going to happen in tonight's story. So let's get right to it, and we'll have a good time in the God's Word tonight. Let me silence this. Thank you for that reminder. Verse 41, Luke chapter 2. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. Now, every word is always important. And I always love to point out words that maybe you're just reading the story, maybe you missed. Notice that every year his parents would go up to Jerusalem. You know why? Because they were very religious, okay? It shows the dedication that Joseph and Mary had to the Lord. And if they weren't very dedicated, they now have the child of God with them, and so now they really want to always do everything that God says. But Jesus didn't go with them. And there's a reason for this, because it's Jewish tradition. In the Jewish world, you were considered an adult at 13. So at 12, that's the age that you start to become an adult. And so at 12, that's when Joseph and Mary would want to take him with them to the Passover so that Jesus can witness what the Passover is all about, how it's done, what you're supposed to do, how you lead your family, because the father is the high priest in his home, and Jesus would understand what the Passover is all about. So they went every year. But verse 42, and when he became 12. So Luke's going to give us a little insight into the young Jesus. Now Jesus, man, I feel like I'm going a million miles an hour. But let me see if I can slow down just a little bit. If you were Jesus, or you were God, they're both God, they're both the same. Wouldn't it have been nice if he could have gotten our redemption by going, hey, why do I got to go through all of this baby stuff, child stuff, growing up? Can I not just go down there as a man and get crucified on a Friday and be back Sunday morning? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, would that have worked?
No.
No. See, Hebrews says that he had to be tempted in everything that we are. But here's the more theological reason though. See, we can receive redemption because Jesus paid my price, right? Mm-hmm. Jesus, who knew no sin, according to Hebrews, was made sin by God so that I could be forgiven. Now, not only did he take my sin, but what did he do for me? He gave me his life. His baby, his childhood, his teenage years, his life in the ministry, all the way to his death. That's a credit to me. That's given to me. He grew up just like I did, only he had no sin. And I sinned from the time I practically came out of the womb. The reason Jesus didn't have a propensity to sin, he was not born under the curse. He wasn't born under Adam's curse. He had the Holy Spirit with him from the beginning. He was God. And yet, it does say he was tempted in every way that we were, and he did not fail to succumb to the temptation. So even as a 2-year-old, he was a perfect 2-year-old. Even as a 4-year-old, he was a perfect 4-year-old. All through his childhood, whatever mom and dad expected, that's what Jesus did. He was in complete subjection to them. He did exactly what they wanted. I'm sure they didn't lord over him any more than they did his brothers or sisters. They probably expected the same out of all. But they never had to worry about Jesus. He was always where he was supposed to be, always on time, always did what they wanted. After all, he was God even as a child. He knew their hearts too. He knew what mama wanted and he knew what daddy wanted. But it does say that he grew and he grows. And his brain does have to develop. And now at 12, according to Jewish tradition, he is about to become a man, so he now can retain the fullness of his godly mind. Okay? So stay with me. So now, and when he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. So now Jesus goes with them, probably his very first Passover. So let's not do 43 just yet. So if you get the movie in your head about this first Passover, can you imagine if you're the Son of God, if you're Jesus? I realize he's only 12. But he gets to Jerusalem, and a couple of million people have made this trek down there because they all want to be there for Passover. And hundreds of thousands of lambs are being slain. And Jesus knows that's what I've come for. That's my mission. I'm taking that lamb's place. My blood will be shed for these people. And he watches the people as they go through this ceremony. And he is involved in the Passover ceremony. They have their own lamb and they slay it and they eat it. And they go through that whole thing where they tell the story and everything. Just imagine little Jesus and everything that he knows. It's like, I was there. I was there with Moses. I was there with the angel of death. I also understand what this Passover meal means. I also know that in 18 more years, or about 21 more years actually from this point, I'm going to share this meal with my disciples, and I'm going to explain to them what it really means, that it's really all about me. And you all remember one time we had a Maundy Thursday, and I went in detail about the Passover dinner and showed where every aspect of the Passover dinner points to Jesus Christ. And he must have seen all this at that first Passover that he goes. And then he gets to go in the temple. And you know, in Jerusalem, and especially at this time of the year, there are some great men of God in the temple that know a lot about the Messiah, that know a lot about the Passover, that know a lot about the law. And they're teaching in the temple. And that must have just been like honey to a flower, or a bee to a flower. You know, it just had to be a wonderful attracting force for Jesus because he couldn't get that in his hometown of Nazareth. There's that little synagogue, and as we read later, when he goes to that synagogue, they're not very good people in that synagogue at all. But here he is with people that really, they really love God and they love their sacrifices. And now they're returning. 43. And as they were returning, after spending the full number of days. That's really important too. You might think, well, I mean, what does that even mean? Well, most people that came down just came down to have their lamb slaughtered by the priest, have it blessed by the priest, eat the Passover dinner, and obey the Sabbath, because that's the Sabbath day is the next day, that special Sabbath. But then they have the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's the next 7 days. And that concludes the Passover feast. And so they stay for the full number of days. So they stayed for at least 8 days. Most people would only stay for 2. They would come, lamb would be sacrificed. Next day they would eat it. They would observe a Sabbath. They wouldn't do anything on that day. They would stay in the temple. They'd probably hear these stories about the Passover, the things that they were to do. And on the next day, bam, they're on their way back home. Now, it's a 3-day, maybe even 4-day journey down to. It's 80 miles. And back then, they could usually get about 20 miles a day. But sometimes they could move a little faster at maybe 25. But when they move 20 or 25, it's 3 to 4 days journey down to Jerusalem. So about 3 days down. Then they spent 8 days in Jerusalem. And now here we are in verse 43, at the end of 43. The boy, Jesus, stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents were unaware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan and went a day's journey. Now these are not irresponsible parents whatsoever, okay? First off, Joseph and Mary would have went down with the whole family. So Joseph's brothers and Joseph's parents and grandparents, they're probably going down there in a caravan. That's why usually they only got about 20 miles of the day. This is how it would work too. You'd put the children in the front. And sometimes a few mothers up there with the children, some people who kind of watch the children. The men were in the back. And the reason they would do that is because the caravan could move at whatever the pace the children could keep up in, okay? They usually were the slowest. And so they put the children in the front, and however fast they could go is how fast you're going to get there. And the men would basically just be the protector. So they expected Jesus to be somewhere out there in the front of the caravan with, Aunt Mary or Uncle Joe or whoever. They figure somebody's got him because Jesus was always where he was, and you never had to worry about him. You just did not have to worry about Jesus. So don't even think that they're irresponsible parents at all. But the cool thing is, at the end of the day, we'd get together and have a family meal at the end of the day. Build a fire, camp around like they did in the Westerns. They circle up the wagons, and I can imagine Joseph's, looking around, and he's like, Mary, where's Jesus? He's always here. He's usually the first one. He's usually helping get the stuff together. Where's Jesus at? Mary's like, I don't know. He's got to be around here. It's like, Jesus! They start calling a little bit. Yeah. Jesus!
Yeah. Daddy's getting worried.
Exactly. And after, about 15 or 20 minutes, and no one has seen him, and they start asking, well, I haven't seen him today. Well, he wasn't. And maybe his brothers, maybe a little younger brother that he pretty much always hung out with. He surely had one kid that one of his brothers liked him. He probably wasn't real liked, but maybe one of them. Could not be found. And so now they're worried. And they're anxious because, he's just never not been there. And they don't understand it. Now, how far have they gone?
A day.
A day's journey. They've gone a day's journey out, okay? And so just keep that in mind. All right, so suppose him to be in the caravan, went a day's journey, verse 44, and they began looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances, verse 45. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem for him. Then after 3 days, they found him in the temple. Now listen, they did not have to search 3 days. 3 days is the whole amount of time that they've been looking for Jesus. Okay, so 1 day was spent traveling out. That's the first day. The second day was spent going back. That's the second day. Then it did take them a day to find him. So you're Mary and Joseph, okay? Now first off, here's another interesting tidbit. I was listening to some commentators talk about, the caravan and all that. I really don't believe they held the caravan up. Do you?
No.
I don't think so. I think Mary and Joseph said, listen, they might have took the brothers and said, they might have took their immediate family. But they're like, we'll go back, we'll look for the boy, you guys go on, okay? I mean, ain't no need in holding y'all up, y'all get on back. And they probably only had just enough provisions now too. So now Joseph's probably scrambling around trying to figure out, we have to buy more provisions when we get to Jerusalem because, So they get back to Jerusalem, and then it takes them about a day to find him. Now, where do you suppose they went when they first got back to Jerusalem? Well, they probably went to social services, wouldn't you? They went down to the police station, wherever the constable was, the guy that's sort of in charge, the mayor's office, whatever. Because if my son is missing, well, surely he's asking about us. We left him. I mean, we thought he was with us, but obviously we left him behind. So So that'd be the first thing he would do. Now it's been 2 days because they spent a day out and a day back. This kid's probably, they're figuring he's probably afraid. He's only 12. He doesn't know what he's doing. Never been to Jerusalem before. He's the Son of God. Yeah, but I don't know. You know, hey, you never know. He's a middle schooler. Yeah. But yeah, they're probably looking in the ordinary places that a child would go to say, where's my mommy? Where's my daddy?
Public guards.
Yeah, and the temple is not that place. Okay, that's just probably not it. So it takes them a little while. And this is, and the movie in my head says this. Joseph's going, man, I'm looking for my son. His name is Jesus. We're from Nazareth. We lost him a couple of days ago. They don't have pictures, you know. Can't show here. You know this? Yeah. So and they all look alike. They all dressed in the same thing. But I'm sure he said. And then I bet you someone says, you know, there's this 12-year-old boy in the temple, and he's confounding the teachers in there. He's asking some really interesting questions, and he's saying some really interesting things, and he's only 12 years old. And Mary probably goes, sounds like my kid.
Yeah.
Right? I have the Son of God. That kind of sounds like something he'd be doing. So what does it say? After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. Now, this is kind of interesting, too. Kind of tells you what Jesus was doing here. Because Jesus was not being a teacher, although he could have been. He knew more about what was going on than the teachers did, of course. But he's 12, and he knows his place. He's still a student. The way they show the outline here, this is the way the Jews actually had school. The teachers sat around and the students sat in the middle and they asked questions. That's how they learned. Do you realize there are still some higher learning institutions now that's how they teach?
Yep.
Rather than give you a book and say, this is it, here's the curriculum, and I'm going to just get up in front of you and explain all these terms to you. No. You get the curriculum, you get the book, which they had the Torah and they had the prophets, they had all that. Now, any questions? Because we want to know what you know. We know what it says. We know what it means. But we want to know what you don't know. So they would ask questions. Teachers would be able to explain it, right? It really makes pretty sense. To me, it's a lot more efficient than the way that we teach kids today. And I like that. And as I was studying that this week, I began to incorporate it in my classroom more this week. I let the students ask more questions about what they read. Okay, did you read? Did you understand it? No. Well, did you really read it? Oh, yeah, I mean, I read it. Okay, and I'd throw out a couple terms. You know, what does that mean to you? What did that mean? What's seismology all about? You know, what are earthquakes all about? What are tectonic plates? What's Richter scale? You know, let them ask some questions and see what's going on, right?
Do you remember the plant?
Yeah, so Jesus was doing that. But see, what amazed them about Jesus was he asked questions that they didn't have answers to. And then they would inquire of him. And he would give them answers. Check it out. All who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. See, the students are just supposed to ask questions, and the teachers are supposed to have answers. And I bet they didn't have some answers. And Jesus has all the answers. You know, this is the only time you'll ever see Jesus as a student. Anytime else you see him in the Gospels, he is the teacher. And anytime he asks questions of the teachers, they don't have an answer. And the reason is Jesus asked them questions that he knows they do not know the answer to. Okay? What's also kind of interesting in the Greek is that when he says teachers, let's see, in the midst of teachers, verse 46, then after 3 days they found him in the temple sitting in the midst of the teachers. That word in the Greek is didaskalos, which means teacher, but it's the only time it's used in any of the Gospels, was here. In other words, Luke gave them credit for actually being teachers, but after that, when Jesus is in his ministry, he uses the word nomikos, which means a lawyer. Now, we think of lawyers understanding, the law of the land, and they sue people, and they represent you in court. So that's not what a lawyer was in Jesus' day. A lawyer understood the law of Moses, so he could explain the law of Moses. He was basically an expert in the first 5 books of the Bible. He's like a theologian. So he's that kind of lawyer, not just like what we would think. And that's called nomikos. And then he also used this word grammateus, which means scribes, which is what he attributed to the scribes and the Pharisees. Grammateus, just scribes, just someone that wrote down scripture or that could interpret scripture. But he never called them teachers. Jesus was the only one called teacher in the Gospel of Luke after this point. So that's just something kind of to go about. They were astonished. It says when they saw him, they were astonished. Verse 48, right? So now we're talking about the parents. So verse 47, we're talking about the teachers. Verse 48, now that's Joseph and Mary. And when they saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you." Now, I don't think Mary was really admonishing him too badly. I don't think she was scourging him too bad. But listen, you've always been where you need to be. And this is the first time you've sort of let us down. I mean, you did not come along with the group. I remember that morning telling you that we're leaving today. We're leaving. You need to be in the group. You need to be up front. And I didn't worry about you because when I tell you something, you just do it. So I think this is the first time the sword pierces Mary's soul was the answer she got back from her son.
Oh, yeah.
What did he say? Verse 49, and he said to them, "Why is it that you were looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my Father's house?" That had to hurt Mary a little. For 12 years, they've had this little boy. It's their boy. Okay? It's their son. And now they realize he's not their son. He belongs to the world. He is God's son. I'm about my Father's business. And it certainly isn't carpentry. Okay? This is right where I need to be, in God's house with God's people. That's what I came for. And like I say, Jesus was probably so interested to hear what the teachers of Israel were teaching the people. Now, did he need to know that? I don't know. Sometimes we wonder how much Jesus left behind in glory. We do know that he can read men's hearts. We do know that he knew the future. We do know that he could look into men's and see their motives and their intentions. We know that, so he was all God. But possibly in the 12 years that he was growing up, he wasn't privy to everything that's going on in the world, and maybe he missed that. Because when he was in heaven in glory, he could always see everything that was going on. And now he's like, I got to get caught up and move it on here to the temple. I'm going to find out what these guys are teaching my people down here, right? And he was just probably amazed as much by them as they were amazed by him, right? So I don't really know what all that works. But here's the first time I think the sword pierces Mary's soul, because she realizes that he is about his Father's business. And then verse 50. It's kind of weird. Verse 50 says, "But they did not understand the statement which he had made to them." You know, this is not new either. Not understanding what Jesus has to say is not new. Look at, let's see, where is it found? Luke chapter 9. So if you're still in Luke, just turn over a few pages. Luke chapter 9, and we'll look at verses 44. Start reading in verse 44. Jesus is talking to his disciples here now. But in verse 44, he says this, "Let these words sink into your ears, for the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." But they did not understand this statement, and it was concealed to them. See, it was even concealed from them so that they would not perceive it. And they were afraid to even ask him about his statement. So Jesus says this, and I can just see Peter now going, I have no idea what he just said. I don't have any idea what that just means. That doesn't make any sense to what I thought he's coming to do. So my brother-in-law, he has a statement that he loves to say that I just love about him. He says, yeah, I don't, what is he say? I had it in my head and then I don't. He goes, I don't accept that. Yeah, that's what he says. I don't accept that. Yeah. In other words, he hit a golf shot once that like went in the water. He just put another ball down and said, "I don't accept that." I feel like the disciples were sort of doing that. He said that like, yeah, that don't make any sense. Okay, we just move on. Right? And maybe Mary and Joseph were a little like that because they don't really understand what it is that Jesus is trying to say here. But I think they're beginning to understand who their child is. And you know what's really cool is that in the process of childhood, in Jewish terms, you have, and Luke uses all these terms about the baby. The baby, Christ, that's one Hebrew word. And then there's a child. They're called a child then, up to a certain point. I had this down. Oh, and then about the age of 5 or 6, they're called by their proper name, whether they're a boy or a girl, they call him a boy. So he's a boy now. So they were a babe, then they were a child, which we would call like toddlers, and then a boy, which is about my grandson's age. And then at 12, it's the first time they're ever called a son. Did you know that? He's not called a son until he's 12. And see, this is where you got to understand how the Jews would understand when Jesus says, I'm the Son of God. How much they said, you need to be crucified. You equated yourself with God. See, when a boy would become 12, he would become his father's son, which meant that he was equal with his father. He now held all the rights of sonship, inheritance, and rulership even in his house. And when he became 13, he became a man. I found that fascinating, that it's at 12. Luke makes sure you know he's 12. Theophilus would have understood these Jewish traditions. And he would have understood that I am about my father's business. I am no longer Joseph's son. I am the Son of God. That's really what he just told Mary and Joseph. And y'all need to get over it, because this is what I'm here for. But what else? But verse 51, and I like that. It's not a but. It's an and. And that's a great word here. And he went down with them, which anytime you leave Jerusalem, you go down. They are going to Nazareth, which is up on the map, but you remember they don't really have maps back then. So the Bible says, and he went down because Jerusalem was in the high place, Nazareth was on the far, and so he had to only go down. And they went down with him and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. So this is the only little story that we have in 3 decades of Jesus' life. All the other Gospels start when Jesus was 30 and when he started his ministry. But Luke, rightly so, adds this one little tidbit that God made sure that was in our Gospels. Because not only did Elizabeth say that he was the Son of God, not only did Zacharias know that he's the Son of God, not only did John the Baptist know that he was the Son of God, not only did, Simeon know that he was the Son of God, not only did Anna know that he was the Son of God, but Jesus knew he was the Son of God. See, that's what's really important about these cults. These people, these critics that say, oh, he was 30 and he did this, or he was just a man and he... No, at 12, Jesus knew he was the Son of God. He was here to do his Father's business. He knew this from birth. But it's at this point that he now is a son. And he's like, now let me tell you who I am the son of. Because I'm not the son of Joseph. I am the Son of God. And that's what he says, and that's what he means. Next week, we're going to get into, I want you to understand these imperatives that Luke tells us through his whole gospel. We're going to go through that. And we're also going to talk about what the word son means to Jews. I think you're already getting it a little bit. But next week, we're going to talk about a guy that was called encouragement because he was the son of encouragement. These 2 boys that were called the sons of thunder. Anybody remember who they are? Good, you'll find out next week. Who was the son of perdition? We'll find out who that was too. All right, the sons of hell. There's a scripture that says these are the sons of hell. Does that mean that hell had children? Of course not. There are ones that say the sons of light. We are the sons of light. Did you know that? But we're not created by the sun or by the light. There are the sons of the wicked one. There were the sons of Belial. See, all of these are sons. And then we're going to talk about what it means to be the only begotten Son. Such a weird thing. The Jehovah's Witnesses, poor people, they just have it so wrong. They believe that Jesus is the sole, only begotten creation of God. Oh my goodness. And they just lose sight of exactly what those words even mean. Let's talk about them next week, because I really want to go into detail on all that. It's going to take me 15 or 20 minutes to get through that. And I think you're going to enjoy that study. And then we'll go on to chapter 3. How about that? All right, let's bow our heads.